LeighTDickey.com. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast. I am your host, Leigh Dickey, and today I want to talk about how Vince McMahon is a hard boss. I am recording this live, or at least on location, at a park closer to where I live. So if you hear ambient noise and sort of wind and cars going by, don't be surprised, because I'm out in public and people are probably looking at me talking into a microphone and probably think I'm crazy at this point. But let's get back to the topic at hand. Today I want to talk about how Vince McMahon is a hard boss. Now, don't take my word for it. I don't work for the WWE, even though I'd like to someday. I don't work for the WWE. I have no idea of the inner workings of McMahon Land and World Wrestling Entertainment. I have no idea about that. I'm not Vince McMahon's right-hand man. I'm not Triple H, obviously, and or the Briscoes or whoever. Anybody in the upper echelon at the WWE. What I'm talking about is in video game form. Vince McMahon is a hard boss in terms of video games. If anybody has ever played WWF No Mercy on the Nintendo 64, you know what I'm talking about. Now, I remember as a kid, I think I was about 10 years old when this game came out. I think it came out about 19-20 years ago. So I got that game for Christmas for my Nintendo 64 because I have always been a huge wrestling fan, and I wanted it one year. My parents got it for me. And in this game, you have certain, like the story mode is a certain type of championship path. So you have the European title, or you had the European title in those days. You had the hardcore title, the Intercontinental title, the light heavyweight title, the tag team titles, obviously the main championship, the WWF championship, the heavyweight championship. Did I say the Intercontinental title? Like, you had all the titles available to you at the time, and you'd go on certain paths or certain championship quests to unlock those titles to use in the regular game. So like exhibition matches and things like that. Now, every other title path in that game to me is relatively easy, right? Or at least it was relatively easy. You could win the championship fairly simply and fairly easy as it is. You could take a regular performer, say like The Rock or Triple H or whoever, your favorite wrestler at the time, run through the championship path of your choosing, light heavyweight, intercontinental, hardcore, European, tag title, doesn't matter. And you could win those titles relatively easy. They weren't that difficult. When it came to the main championship, the WWF championship, to unlock it, you had to face Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon himself, the boss himself, he held the WWF title in that game, at least in story mode. He actually held it in real life too, but then vacated it the next week. So he's the guy you have to beat in order to unlock the WWF championship for use in exhibition matches, basically in the regular game outside of story mode. That match, I remember having to go through that match several times, and I could never win it with like just a regular wrestler. I couldn't win it with The Rock. I couldn't win it with Stone Cold Steve Austin. I couldn't win it with Triple H. I couldn't win it with Mick Foley. I couldn't win it with any of the top guys you would see at that time. But what happened was, to go up against Vince McMahon, I figured out a formula that worked. I chose the heavier wrestlers. So like The Big Show or Viscera, Viscera's who I actually won the title with in that game. Rest in peace, Nelson Frazier, aka Mabel. Mabel was the third man, by the way. And, Viscera, Mabel, depending on how you know him. But I chose Viscera, and it worked. what I didn't realize about that particular match in that game, in WWF No Mercy for the Nintendo 64, is that it was a submission match. No matter how much damage I did to the Mr. McMahon character, I couldn't pin him, right? You couldn't get the 1, 2, 3, so it was a submission match. I had to get him to tap out, and it took forever. I kept putting the sleeper on him, and it worked. Granted, it was like, hit him with your finish. 1, 2. I don't even think he stayed down because he kicked out right away. But if you get him in a submission hold, like a bear hug I found that the sleeper worked, but it just took forever. Because I remember by the time I was done, that match to unlock the WWF title in WWF No Mercy, to use it in like exhibition matches and things like that, it took me about 47 minutes. I remember that distinctly. It's like burned into my memory. It took 47 minutes and change. It was like 47:09 or something like that. Close to like 47, 48 minutes. And I was so happy to unlock the title. I felt great, but I was so tired because the match took so long. It was like the proverbial Iron Man match in that game, if you will. And I just didn't understand it. So, I mean, that is why I would constitute saying Vince McMahon is a hard boss, because he's probably one of the hardest video game bosses that I've ever faced. And I got the idea of doing this episode of Pinfall, the Pro Wrestling Podcast, which is available every Monday from my official website, LeighTDickey.com, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, you name it, that's where it's at. But Vince McMahon is probably the hardest video game boss that I have ever faced. And I say that after getting the idea from What Culture Gaming, when they were talking about who's the hardest boss, or from a video they did about who are the harder bosses, who are the worst bosses to face in video games. And to be quite honest, anybody that's played WWF No Mercy, maybe there was an easier way to do it, but I always found that, I mean, the mechanics in that game at the time, if you took a heavier wrestler, say like Paul White, the Big Show, or Viscera, or Mabel, or whatever you want to call him, Nelson Frazier, and you put him up against, say, The Rock, or Stone Cold Steve Austin, Vince McMahon, or any of the smaller guys, like a Hardcore Holly, or what have you, any of the, like, say, like average size performers, superstars, you got him up against Viscera in that game at least, and they tried to pick him up, they couldn't do it because he was a super heavyweight and therefore really, really heavy, but like 500 plus pounds. They couldn't pick him up because they were only, say, 225, 250. And, you know, I guess it was an arcade style video game at the time. So I kind of got the idea, like, hey, maybe I could win the WWF title with him and then unlock the title and then just put the WWF title on, you know, my favorite superstar, say like Steve Austin or The Rock, or even, I think I put the title when I got it unlocked on Hardcore Holly, because I've always been a big Hardcore Holly fan. But whoever it was, I mean, just that match, I remember it going 47 and change, 47 minutes, and my thumbs were so sore. It was just like, I'm glad I don't ever have to do that more than once. I think I may have sold WWF No Mercy to a video game store, but, you know, I'm happy to have played and gotten hours of enjoyment out of it. I mean, I could say that, in all honesty, I enjoyed it. I played it to my heart's content. I unlocked every championship. I did as much as I could in that game. I played it for years. I played it for ages. I mean, and I don't think you'll ever get a roster like that again in the WWE at the time. I mean, you had Too Cool, you had Rikishi, you had Hardcore Holly, Crash Holly, the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, the Dudleys. I mean, I remember trying to win the WWF title in this game with Bubba Ray Dudley, and I figured they billed him as a super heavyweight, and he was pretty big back then, but he, you know, the physics and game mechanics you could pick him up like you would every average superstar, right? Didn't work. So I think I may have put the WWF title on Bubba Ray. I know I went on a singles run with Bubba Ray. I don't know if it was the hardcore title or the European title. It might have even been the IC title. I think I did it. I tried to do every championship path with Hardcore Holly and Bubba Ray Dudley, or Bully Ray as he's now known. And it was just one of those things where like it didn't work. But once I got Viscera in there, suddenly it clicked, right? And it seemed to work. But Vince McMahon is probably one of the hardest, video game bosses that I have ever faced. He's probably one of the hardest bosses you'll ever have in real life. I mean, I wouldn't know. I don't work for the WWE. And I just think that, like, if ever given the chance, they probably would mirror each other. Have a hard video game boss, yet hard boss in real life, because, I mean, he's the figurehead, he's the guy at the top, the money comes out of his pocket, and, like, why wouldn't he be a hard guy to work for and a hard guy to please? But that's basically the gist of today's episode, why I think Vince McMahon is a hard boss. You can find Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, on my official website, LeighTDickey.com, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Write us a review, leave us the comments. If you want to be a guest on Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, email me at LeighTDickey, that's LeighTDickey @gmail.com, and we'll set up the interview, because I just want to talk to wrestling fans about wrestling and about their passion for the sport of professional wrestling. That would be awesome. If you want to be a guest, email me again at LeighTDickey @gmail.com. Find episodes of Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, every Monday at midnight Eastern Time on iTunes, Spotify, my official website, LeighTDickey.com, and wherever you get your favorite podcast. So for Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, this is Leigh Dickey saying thanks for listening. Please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Find us on YouTube by searching for Leigh Dickey TV. And I will see you all and talk to you all next Monday for a brand new episode of Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast. Leigh Dickey signing off. Peace. LeighTDickey.com